I'd like to introduce Christelle Neant, who is a journalist in the Donbass, and she's very kindly agreed to help us try and understand what's going on in East Ukraine. And I think the first thing I'd like to ask you, Christelle, is how long you've been in the Donbass and how much of it you've travelled and seen, and particularly since the beginning of the conflict.
So I'm here since 2016, so it's a little bit more than 6 years that I'm here. In these 6 years, I've traveled a lot. I've traveled in all over the Donetsk People's Republic, where I live, and also to the Lugansk People's Republic. There I traveled more in the 2016, a little bit in the 2017, but mainly in 2016. A bit less after, because the two republics have two different accreditation systems for the journalists, and so I prefer to stay mainly in the DPR. So in the DPR, I've traveled all over the republic. Now that the territory which is under our control is expanding, I've also traveled to the newly controlled territories, like Mariupol. I made a lot of reports in Mariupol. I went also to Volnovakha, to Granitnoye, to Bugas. Now I'm a bit waiting for new advances to continue traveling to the new places, to discuss with the population, with the people, to assess how they lived during the military operations and how they feel now. So in the DPR, I've been in almost all the towns or little villages that are on the front line, and most of the big towns which are on the rear. So I know quite well now the Donbass region.
Wow, yes. You must have seen a lot in the last 6 years, especially recently. I think because you know the area so well, and because you've seen, and this way you're focused. If we focus on the Donbass area, and what I'd like to do is to contrast what we are hearing in the West about the war to what you've seen and what you know is happening, because it looks like there are two wars happening. One is the one that's being headlined every day in our media, corporate media, and the one they're trying to not let us see because of we have seen a lot of censorship, lots of accounts shut down on Twitter, with media outlets closed. Obviously RT was closed.
The main problem is that the current operation, which was launched by Russia, most media present like this is the war, but the war began in 2014. The war in the Donbass began 8 years ago after the putsch of the Maidan, after new authorities which were put in place after a putsch. I remember it was an illegal putsch which thrown away a democratically elected president. Yes, Yanukovych was corrupted, but honestly, the people who went after him were not less corrupted and even more. And they thrown away the president without respecting even the Ukrainian constitution. And the first decision they took, it was to remove to Russian language its official status. So Russian language was not an official language of the country anymore. And you have to understand that Ukraine is absolutely not a unified, homogeneous country. You have 2 or even 3 different Ukraines. You have all the south and east of the country, plus the Crimean Peninsula, who are mainly Russophone, people who are speaking Russian, Russian-speaking people. and who are more oriented to Russia. It's all the industrial part of Ukraine. All the industries was built during the Soviet Union, so their standards are still aligned with the Russian ones. So before the Maidan, Russia was the main market for Ukrainian products. You have, after all, the central part, we will say, of Ukraine, which is like they speak more Ukrainian. And you have really the western part of Ukraine, which is really quite special. They speak really mainly Ukrainian. And that's from this part of the country that came most of the neo-Nazis ideology and groups, like it was during the Second World War. I mean, the collaborators of the Nazis, the main leaders of these groups, they were from this region. So this region, which was under Polish control before the Second World War. So in 2014, after the removal of the status of the Russian language, Crimea and the Donbass were like 90-95% of the people are native Russian-speaking people. They, of course, raised because they refused that non-elected authorities, which were put in place by a putsch organized by the USA. Because I mean, McCain and Victoria Nuland were supporting publicly the protesters on the Maidan. So I mean, it's absolutely not a secret. So people here in Crimea refused that. So Crimea, they had the chance that Russian militaries were legally present on the peninsula due to a location contract that they had with Ukraine for the naval bases in Sebastopol. So they were able to organize their referendum in very calm and peaceful atmosphere, so all was okay, and they were reintegrated to Russia. In the Donbass, the situation was different. There also there were referendums which were held to declare their independence from Ukraine. But quickly the war began, because of course the Ukrainian authorities did not agree with that. And so they began to wage a war against their own population. So it's really important to understand the Donbass war was a civil war. And it was absolutely not a war against Russia. We can see now the difference. When Russia really intervenes, you can see the pace of the progress of the Russian troops. So you understand that in 2014, it was absolutely not Ukrainian forces versus Russian forces, but Ukrainian armed forces versus their own population, which organized itself as people's militia. So people took the weapons they could find. They stormed like police building, SBU, so the Secret Service building, all the caserns and so on, where there were military bases, and some Ukrainian soldiers also gave up with their weapons or with their equipment because they refused to shoot on their own population. So that's from where came the first weapons. And after, at each victory, they took the weapons and equipment from the Ukrainian units that they defeated.
If I could talk about the, thank you for the background. And it's certainly a different story we've been told.
It's completely different, and I would like to emphasize something. There were two peace agreements which were done. The first Minsk agreements in September 2014, and the second Minsk agreement in February 2015, which were signed by Ukraine, the two People's Republic, Donetsk and Lugansk, under the guarantee of France, Germany, Russia and the OSCE. These agreements were never respected by Ukraine, including the full ceasefire. And that's because of this non-implementation of these agreements that 8 years after we ended in this situation. Because Ukraine not only at the end openly and publicly refused to implement the Minsk agreement it had signed, but they also prepared an offensive against the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republic. It means months before the military operation of Russia began, DPR and LPR warned, and I've relayed these warnings, that we saw more and more Ukrainian troops, more and more Ukrainian military equipment arriving near the front line in the Donbass. And we warned that it's okay, it seems Ukraine is preparing an offensive against us. And nobody reacted, even the Western guarantors of the Minsk agreement, namely France and Germany. And after, when the Russian military operation began, they all began to shout and to scream and so on. But there is a background behind, which is explaining why Russia decided to intervene and why the situation has led to such, I would say, such a decision.
It's described here as a unprovoked war.
Yeah, it's absolutely not unprovoked. I mean, Ukrainian officials in the last month publicly said, we cannot apply the Minsk agreements because it would destroy the country, it would destroy Ukraine, so we have to rewrite them. But the Minsk agreements were a very hard compromise to obtain, and people have to understand they have been written in a way that would prevent Ukraine to do an ethnic cleansing in the Donbass, because that's what began in 2014. I have to remember thousands of people were killed in this war, a lot of civilians. I mean, the admitted numbers in total are like 14,000 people with military plus civilian, but only if we look at children, we had like 150 children which were killed in DPR and LPR. We had thousands of peaceful people who were killed, civilians, purely civilians who were killed, and as I said, against the Ukrainian army, it was people's militia. It was people which were mainly from here. There were also some volunteers from elsewhere, but mainly from here, who took weapons. So most of the militia which were killed, it's men and women which were born here. So it's the population here paid a very high tribute to this war. A lot of civilians and a lot of militia died during the war in 2014 to 2015 mainly, and a lot of people in Ukraine did not hide that what they wanted to do is to apply the Croatian scenario in Donbass. So the Croatian scenario is ethnic cleansing, like Croatia did in the Serbian Krajina. In 1960, 96, 97, I don't remember exactly, but in the 90s, when they recovered the control over this territory, and all the Serbians had to flee or to die. So the Ukrainian authorities did not hide that they wanted to do that. So the Minsk agreements were written in a way with a chronology of implementation of each point, which were done in such a way that it could not happen. And what Ukraine meant by rewriting the Minsk agreements, it was changing the order of the different points so that it's to her advantage. Like she wanted to get back the control over the frontier with Russia before applying all the political points, like giving autonomy to the two republics, to change its constitution, to give them this autonomy, and so on and so on. So they wanted to retake the control of the region without applying the main part, which was the political one. So they wanted really to make a genocide here. I mean, they didn't hide about that. That's motivated Russia, because Russia could not admit that the people here would be genocided just because they wanted to be able to speak their native language.
Am I right in thinking that I know since the beginning of the conflict, of the operation, that teachers cannot teach, or they could face up to 2 years in prison for teaching Russian.
They passed laws forcing all the teaching to be in Ukrainian. They also, forced teachers to teach a completely perverted version of history of the country. Like teaching that Russia is the aggressor and has invaded Donbass, which was absolutely not the case. I mean, when all this was put in place, they forbade people to display the St. George ribbon, which was the mark of the victory against Nazism during the Second World War. They even forbade, they put laws that forbade to speak positively about USSR. I mean, so there was a huge censorship against the media. Volodymyr Zelensky closed several opposition media. He put sanctions against them, even in contradiction with Ukrainian constitution, because it's not allowed to put sanctions against your own citizens, and that's what he did. He has closed several opposition parties also. So there is really a big problem with the official narrative about what is happening now. Ukraine is absolutely not the democracy fighting authoritarian of Russia. It's absolutely not the case. Ukraine is absolutely not a democracy. All the decent voices have been censored, have been shut up. Through sanctions, through imprisoning. The leader of one of the main opposition parties was imprisoned, and now the SBU is claiming that they have retaken him, but in fact, I think he never left because he was under house imprisonment. Just because under false pretext and false accusations. I mean, some journalists even spent a lot of time in prisons in Ukraine just because they spoke against the Donbass war. There is one, he spent something like more than 500 days, so more than a year in prison, just because he said that it was a civil war. So it was they sued him for high treason or something like that, just because he told the truth. So that's the situation in the post-Maidan Ukraine, and that's the reality. And they have censored everything, and so the teachers had to comply with all this bullshit, and the teachers who didn't want, they were just fired, and that's all.
So the narrative that we're told is, or the picture that we're given is, that it is a liberal democracy or rising liberal democracy, and for years there were articles published by corporate media, by mainstream media, showing the far right and Nazi element. And that's completely gone now. They've buried that. But I thought if we could come back to the present now, and because you've illustrated the situation and the war for 8 years, that's also been airbrushed from history, with and talk about what you've seen and what you've heard compared to what we're being presented with regarding what the Russians and what the Russian army is doing. Particularly, they're being accused of, war crimes. The term war crimes is being just thrown around. Even, you've got Joe Biden, other leaders, calling Vladimir Putin war criminal all the time.
It makes me laugh because Joe Biden himself has a lot of blood on his hands, and most of the US presidents and a lot of politicians, even in the UK, do I have to remember that they did a war against Yugoslavia? The ex-Yugoslavia, no, they bombed Syria. I mean, they bombed Iraq, they bombed Afghanistan, they bombed Syria, Libya. I mean, all these people, they have all blood on their hands, and so it makes me a bit laugh that when I see these kind of accusations against Vladimir Putin. Personally, I did interview with a lot of people in all the liberated territories, and I found nobody who was complaining about a bad behavior from the Russian soldiers. Not a single one. As I said, I went to Bugas, to Volnovakha, to Granitnoye, and a lot to Mariupol.
Can I ask you about
all the people there, they only have good words about Russians, saying that they saved them. A lot of people say we waited for you for 8 years to liberate us because, as I said, there was a referendum in 2014. And during this referendum, all the localities, all the towns and villages of the Donbass, so it means of the Donetsk and the Lugansk regions, participated, and people voted at 90 and 93% in the Lugansk People's Republic for the independence from Ukraine. So all the territories that the Ukrainian army succeeded to regain in 2014, these people lived, from their point of view, like an occupation from an army of a country that they decided to leave. So these people, a lot are saying, we waited for you for 8 years and you have liberated us. A lot of people are telling the lot of stories about war crimes of the Ukrainian soldiers, and mainly of the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, like the one of the Azov regiment. That they fired on civilians who tried to escape the town. They fired on people just who were gathering to take some water. They even, we had a story in Mariupol just like 2 weeks ago. People told us that the soldiers from Azov regiment, they thrown a grenade in a flat where there were 2 old grandmas. And they shoot at them when they try to escape, just for free, because they made nothing bad against them. I mean, they were not a danger. They were not a threat against them, just for free, just because they have really a neo-Nazi ideology. They consider Donbass people as subhumans. So I've heard a lot about war crimes of Ukrainians, and I found not a single proof of Russian war crimes. I mean, a lot of people explained us that a lot of destructions, both in Volnovakha and in Mariupol, are due directly to the Ukrainian soldiers, either because they installed their firing positions in the apartments, of people. They expel people and they installed in the flats, or they installed in schools or in hospitals. But they also themselves destroy when they leave. So when they are forced to retreat, they begin to shell the places they have left, even before the DPR or the Russian forces are there. So we had people telling us that they systematically destroy the whole a whole area, like building by building. And they destroyed one building, and when it had been destroyed, then they went to the following, and so on, just to, as I said, okay, if we are defeated, then Mariupol will just be full of ruins. So they tell themselves they used people as human shields. It was something told both by the Russian soldiers, indeed the Chechens ones, with whom I discussed. It was told to us by the civilians themselves, who told us that the Ukrainian soldiers refused to let them evacuate. They were absolutely not aware that there were some humanitarian corridors. One person told us that at some point to retreat, they even took some people as hostages. Including a child. So I have a lot of testimonies of war crimes of Ukrainian soldiers, but I found no proof of any bad behavior from the Russian soldiers. On the contrary, a lot of people thank them, because a lot of people spent like 1 month in basements with very few food, and almost no water. People survived really in really harsh conditions, and they told us the Ukrainian soldiers gave them nothing. They even stole. There was this story about this maternity in Mariupol, which was shelled, but in fact it was. And one of the women which appeared in the photos, the famous photos of this maternity, gave an interview when she evacuated from Mariupol, and she told, in fact, the hospital was taken by the military. They shelled from there. They had their weapons there. It was their headquarters. And she explained that so all the women were in a little building on the side, and were not able to be in real good conditions to give birth. And they were cooking in the street. And she explained that one day the Ukrainian soldiers came and took the food which was for pregnant women, and said, hey, but it's for the pregnant woman. And they said, but we are hungry, you have to make more for them, and that's all, Some people in Mariupol told me also that a lot of shops, of course, were destroyed by shellings, and so people used to take what they could from these destroyed shops to survive, some food, some water. And some people explained this. So the nearby shop was destroyed, and when they arrived, they discovered the Ukrainian soldiers took all the food for themselves and left nothing for the civilians. And when the civilians complained, they said, "We defend you, but what are you defending? You let us in hunger and so on. It's not defending us." So, and when they arrived, the DPR and the Russian soldiers give water immediately, bread. Some give their rations, military rations. Some are even giving their last ones so that people have at least something. But the needs are huge. And Russia is providing a lot of humanitarian help. I see in Mariupol, they have installed several distribution points in like the big previous, it was metro, big shop, and they have installed the big humanitarian distribution point there, and people can come and take all the basics they need. So they are really working hard to put big water citerns everywhere in the town so that people can get a bit of water to live in a little bit better condition. And they do a lot of work to evacuate people, to let people have the choice, on the contrary of what I've seen in some Western media. I've interviewed people, so people say they are free to decide. So if they want, they can go to Donetsk. If they want, they can go to Russia. And if they want, they can go to Ukraine. So they have the three possibilities, and people are able to choose. So on the contrary of what I've read, they are not forced to go to Russia. I mean, it's their own decision, and they can choose what they want.
Could I ask you, have you heard if the Ukrainian government is providing any humanitarian aid anywhere, or is it relying on NGOs?
I've seen nothing. And in Mariupol, for example, I asked, and nobody received any help from the Ukrainian side. Nothing. Right. Nothing.
And I was going to ask you about the hospital, because I've recently been reading reports by the OSCE, which I know the Russian government has now given up on, and it's withdrawn from the monitoring mission. So the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, I think.
Yeah.
So they recently produced a report, and a few weeks before, around the end of March, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the UN, they've set up they have a monitoring mission also in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And I was concerned because I read what they'd written about Mariupol and the hospital, and they both, I think it's the same report spread over two organizations.
I think so.
And they make the point that there are a number of hospitals that were damaged, and they basically make the case or paint the picture that it was Russian, shelling and bombing that has damaged them. But actually, there's an interview by Dr. Hanna Halhovska from one of the hospitals, from the prenatal or perinatal hospital. And she said that she is living testimony to the fact that the Ukrainian regiments and the Azov regiments militarized all the hospitals.
Yeah, that's so what I've seen in Volnovakha. That's what I've seen in Volnovakha. That's what, as I said, this maternity which was shelled in Mariupol, this woman said that the Ukrainian soldiers were installed inside. One of the places where people told me they were shelled by Azov when they gathered to take water, they explained me. So one of the women in their building was injured during this shelling. She lost some toes because of shelling, so she was taken to the nearby hospital. But there she was not admitted in surgery department, because the surgery department was in the over the third floor, and over the third floor it was all Ukrainian soldiers which were firing from the hospital. And I've seen the same in Volnovakha. In Volnovakha, I interviewed the main doctor of the hospital, and he told me they were shooting from the hospital building. They were shooting from the hospital territory, because hospitals here are really, really big. Often they have several buildings with different departments, like one for the maternity, one for like surgery, one for something else. So it's very huge places with a lot of places and some little parks between the buildings, and they installed their artillery in the middle of the territory of the hospital. So in all the places I went, I've seen people who told me that Ukrainian soldiers use hospitals, schools, and a lot of other, civilians, buildings, social infrastructure as firing points, as I said, and even the flats. So, of course, these places are destroyed by Russian shelling, but it was transformed into military targets by the Ukrainian soldiers themselves.
And when you said before that when they leave buildings, they tend to destroy them, or they're known to destroy buildings sometimes that they've been occupying and militarized. Have you heard if that's what they've been doing to the hospitals?
Yeah, in Volnovakha, some people said, not to me, but to another colleague, that they shooted also on the hospital. One of the maternity of Mariupol, we helped evacuate some people, and the hospital was under shelling. So I mean, they shelled a lot of places. They destroyed a lot of bridges themselves when they retreat. For example, the one between Volnovakha and what is it? It's Novotroyskoye. They have destroyed one big road bridge there. They do that in a lot of places to try to stop the advance of the Russian army. So they are themselves destroying a lot of infrastructure and social facilities when they retreat. So, I mean, and as I said, most of them they transform it into military targets. The dramatic theater of Mariupol was also military headquarters. I mean, they install themselves everywhere. There are a lot even of videos. They are taking themselves videos of places where they sleep. Yeah, and you understand it's a school or it's a kindergarten, because you understand by the decorum that it's not a flat, it's not a military base. You understand there are toys, there are little mattresses and educative material. You understand that it's a school or a kindergarten, and they are sleeping there. I was a few days ago in Mariupol, and we found a school near the Illich plant factory that we've seen destruction which are corresponding to this kind of pattern. We saw that this school has had 3 floors, and we saw on the 3rd floor a lot of destruction, indicating that they were certainly shooting from the highest point of this school. And as I said, they publish themselves a lot of video material which is proving that they are basing their units in schools, or that they are firing from such positions. So
I was concerned that this isn't clearly set out in the monitoring missions.
But honestly, people here were really wondering why we continued authorizing the OSCE working here, because it was obvious from the very beginning that they were biased, honestly. I mean, when there was this air attack in Lugansk in June 2014, which killed a lot of civilians. They bombed the places which is in front of the administration building in Lugansk, in the center, and a lot of civilians which were here were killed. And the OSCE claimed that people were killed by the explosion of an air conditioner. I mean, what the heck? I've seen myself how they work, or how they don't do their work, more exactly. I mean, I've seen once a poor grandma. All her windows have been exploded and shattered, and she had a very big crater in her garden, like something like 3 meters wide and almost 1 meter depth. And the OSCE came and they took pictures. And after I read the report, and they claimed that it was a mortar shell of 82 millimeters, but a mortar shell of 82 millimeters never makes such a crater. its artillery of minimum 122 millimeters to make such a huge crater in the ground. And it was every time like this. Even they minimized the caliber of the weapons. Even if they found grad tubes, they would pretend it was mortar shell, or they pretend they cannot determine the direction from where it was shelled, or they didn't come to the place which was shelled. I had already huge arguments with them about that in 2016. There was a place in Trudovsky in the periphery of Donetsk which was shelled by Ukrainian artillery, and one place really you really saw the shell fell in the ground and really stayed in the earth, and it was really clear from where it came. I mean, you could do the trajectory really by yourself. And they refused to came to this place officially because it was already the end of their working day at 2:30 in the afternoon. And every time a lot of stuff like that, there were already complaints. I think it was 2 years ago about how OSCE was reporting about the civilian victims. We discovered that the reports of the UN were more accurate than the one of the OSCE, and we discovered that the OSCE forgot like half of the victims in the DPR and LPR. They were not mentioned. They did not exist. It was really amazing, and there were a lot of time where the DPR, the LPR, and the Russian side complained about the way the OSCE worked. The last straw on the camelback was when GCCC officer was kidnapped by the Ukrainian side. So to ensure the ceasefire, so that people understand, to ensure the ceasefire, an institution was created, which is a joint center for coordination and controlling the ceasefire, the GCCC, and it was composed of both the Ukrainian side, the DPR side, the LPR. At the beginning, there were even Russian observers which were presented on the both sides, but after threats against their security on the Ukrainian side, they retreated from this institution. But it was this institution which is counting the number of shellings and documenting, fixing everything so that it's recorded.
Right.
And these observers have the same immunity than the OSCE observers. They are untouchable. And a few months ago, the Ukrainian side, using a diversion sabotage group, kidnapped on the front line one of these observers who was controlling road repair on the front line. So they were there to check that the ceasefire was observed during the repair time, so that everything was okay. And they kidnapped one of the GCCC officers. And the OSCE was completely silent about this huge violation of the agreements that Ukraine signed. And it led to big protests, both in Lugansk and in Donetsk, in front of their office. Like simple people, just civilians gathered and really complained about how they work. People stayed there for weeks in front of the office in Donetsk to say, but you have to put pressure on Kiev to release this officer from the GCCC. It's a shame that you do nothing. And it was really the moment people were really, but we should put them out of here. Why we accept that they stay here? Now that more territory is controlled by DPR and LPR and Russia, we even discovered that the surveillance cameras, because OSCE used a lot of cameras to monitor the situation, we discovered that some of these monitoring cameras were controlled by Ukrainian soldiers through dedicated software in their computers, so they could redirect the cameras at their will to observe the movements of the DPR or LPR soldiers, to correct their artillery shelling, and so on and so on. And so it's really a shame. So now what this organization can say in its reports, I mean, from my point of view, the value of this is absolutely null. Absolutely null and void, completely void. Because what they did is really like a violation, complete violation of their mandate.
And so we have no, it's very difficult for us because there is no reliable independent organization or agency that we can trust, really. There's so much capitulation to, you know, Western.
Even the UN, you know, you mentioned the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, yeah?
Yeah.
They made a few years ago a report about war crimes during the Ilovaisk battle in 2014. If you just read like the resume and the conclusion, you are, okay, both sides committed war crimes, they are all the same, you know? But if you read the details, you understand it's absolutely not the case. Because on one side, so in Ilovaisk, it was mainly the Aidar battalion, which is also a neo-Nazi battalion. They like tortured, they executed civilians, so extrajudiciary executions and so on. But if you look on the DPR side, what is reproached is like, they took like some of Ukrainian prisoners, and one of the DPR soldier, he punched one of the soldiers in the face. Okay, but when you know the history and you know the fact that most of the soldiers, DPR soldiers, which liberated Ilovaisk, they were from Ilovaisk or its surroundings. The commander of the Somali battalion, which participated into this, the commander Givi, he was himself from Ilovaisk. His parents are living in Ilovaisk. So you can imagine these people, their parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters were in Ilovaisk, were subjected to this bad treatment from the Ukrainian soldiers. So of course, when they found some of these soldiers alive, some of them could have bad reactions, because imagine you perhaps found your grandfather killed in his garden and you learn from the neighbors that he was killed by Ukrainian soldiers. You put your hand on one of these Ukrainian soldiers, you have a lot of chance that you will not be highly diplomatic and Geneva Convention friendly, okay? It's understandable. I mean, or the fact that they complained that some of them didn't receive like medical treatment immediately. But in 2014, the DPR and the LPR were almost surrounded by Ukrainian soldiers. They were lacking everything, even for their own men. Like at some point, they had no morphine, they had no more anesthetics. To find even some paracetamol in the pharmacies and so on, it was already like hurrah, you know, it was like a miracle to find something. So complaining about like lack of medical care, while even DPR soldiers had access to very few of them because they were in a full blockade, if we can tell it this way, it makes no sense. And you cannot put on the same level the fact you punch a guy who had perhaps committed crimes against some of your relatives, and the fact you have killed these relatives like in execution, you know, and that's what the UN did. I mean, you cannot put that on the same level and pretend both sides did war crimes. Please put some, you know, some moderation in that, because and that's what we have seen. So I'm really ashamed of what the UN has done, because I expected better from the UN in terms of unbiased reporting.
It is a concern because we should have trust. We should have faith in its ability to provide a balanced, because certainly the report that came out in March 23rd, 24th, I think, it talks about similar. It has a similar content as the OSCE, and actually, where it paints a picture of, or implications of Russian war crimes. There's no obvious testimony. Either they are not, when they're investigating, they're just taking the testimony of the Ukrainian authorities or the news reports of the Ukrainian authorities. But why aren't they taking testimony of all of the people that witness Ukrainians, taking people as human shields, firing at people and shooting them? So where's this testimony is not being collected, or it's being collected and dismissed. But the monitoring mission, the UN monitoring mission in Ukraine, it's looking at who funds it. It gets a lot of money from Washington, and its partners are the EU, the US, the Ukrainian government. They're not the Russian authorities, they're not.
No, and they have now even expelled Russia from the UN Human Rights Council, which is really amazing when you think that this council is led by Saudi Arabia. I mean, we live in the fourth dimension completely. No, it's completely crazy. But it was the same about the MH17 crash, where all the testimonies which were not going in the wanted direction were just not taken into account. So it's already 8 years that it's like this. As I said, during the last month and years, OSCE took all the excuses possible to not doing their job properly, not to come to, they use the coronavirus as an excuse not to come to record sharing facts or victims. Some of the time they were really forced, like we had to make a big media scandal, so they decide to come to some places. The problem is on the UN, it's the same. I mean, we have seen a lot of accusation about rape, massive rape from Russians. But when you look, there is not a single open public testimony. Not a single woman testified under her own name publicly in front of a camera with her face visible about what happened. It's most of the time anonymous or claims from Ukrainian authorities, and you have no name, no location, and it's completely crazy, completely. I mean, I myself interviewed some people who were prisoner in Ukraine and who were exchanged during this prisoner exchange we had with them during a few years. I relayed or translated a lot of interviews of prisoners and a lot of women who explained they were raped during their captivity. It was a torture method to make them admit crimes that they didn't make. And so I had really consistent testimonies of people who were jailed and who were tortured. And all these people, they testified openly with their face, their name, accessible at least to us. We had one woman first, we had to do it not openly because she still had family on the Ukrainian side, so it was dangerous. But we were two journalists, so I was with the journalist who interviewed, so I could guarantee that that's what she said. And she was herself quite old, so they did not touch her, but she saw how several other women were tortured, were raped, and not once, several times.
By Ukrainian soldiers?
By Ukrainian soldiers, by SBU officers, by people from these right sectors or Azov. So we have consistent testimonies which are public and which are, you see the face of the woman. I mean, the most recent one I shared was from, it was Yulia Prosorova. She made, like, it was last year or 1.5 years ago, she made a very, very heartbreaking testimony about what happened to her. She was captured on the Ukrainian side after the murder of SBU colonel or something like that. And she was charged with his murder, which is really, when you see this girl, you understand she had nothing to do with that. And to break her, she was raped during days, but like, it was really like one, then another, then another, then another. I mean, it was like without an end. She was beaten severely. And she testified all of this in front of a camera with her head visible, with her name and surname openly publicized. I mean, she was not hiding again, like behind an anonymous testimony or something like that.
Yeah.
So when I see all these anonymous witnesses and so on, and for me, and when I see, as I said, I discussed with a lot of civilians in Mariupol, and I'm speaking with them like without a Russian soldier on my back, and nobody told me anything bad against the behavior of Russian soldiers. Nothing. Nobody told me that they had not accurate or normal behavior, that they were criminals or that they did something wrong. Really not. On the contrary. So when I see the contrast between what we are being told by the Ukrainian authorities and the Western media and what I see on the ground, I mean, it's like two different worlds. So I prefer to really believe on what I see myself, because I know how I took my interviews and so on, so I know all is okay with the testimonies I gathered. But I mean, what happened, for example, in Bucha, I made 2 articles about that, proving that what they write is false. And now some UK, I think it's the Guardian, I think, published an article telling that so some forensic was done, and a lot of people, they were killed, they say, by little black small metallic arrows which were in shells. And they say, but it's from Russian shelling. But sorry, Russia doesn't use this kind of technique. I know one army which is using this kind of technique. It's Ukraine. And this since 2014. I've seen myself in places which are frequently shelled by Ukraine, these kind of little metallic darts like this, black. They put that in their shells, and it's destroying everybody which is nearby. They used it in Slavyansk. It was even testified by people about the murder of Italian journalist Andrea Racchelli, who was killed in Slavyansk by shelling from the Ukrainian army in 2014. And people who evacuated his body said that they had no chance to escape because Ukraine used this kind of shell filled with these little black metallic arrows. I found myself some in Zaitseva, a little village in north of Golovka, which is frequently shelled by the Ukrainian army, and I found that, and some of the soldiers, oh, you have a little souvenir from Ukrainian army. So I had this kind of proof that they are using it. But I've seen no proof of Russia using it. So it means these people in Bucha were killed by Ukrainian shellings, and absolutely not by Russia killing people like for free just in streets. That's one point. Second point, most of the people who were killed visible in the streets in Bucha, killed, they had Russian military rations military package of food nearby. We have a video from one of the commanders of, it's like one again, this neo-Nazi regiments and so on, who were in Bucha to clear it from saboteurs and Russian collaborators. Yes, we hear in the video one of his soldiers asking, can I shoot and kill the men who have no blue armband? So the Ukrainians have blue armband to distinguish from Russians which have white armband. And what we see is that most of the people who were killed in Bucha, they have a white armband. It's civilians who put this armband while the town was under Russian control, so that Russians know, okay, I'm neutral, I'm not a threat for you, all is okay. And we see a lot of people who were killed, they have this white armband and they have Russian military food next to them. So we understand what happened. I mean, they say themselves, we will clean the town of Russian collaborators. That's what happened. They considered every person to have a white armband and or Russian military food with them to be Russian collaborators, and they shoot them. But it was Ukrainians who did that, and absolutely not the Russians.
Do you know if that's official government, if it was passed as an official policy to punish saboteurs, collaborators?
I don't know if it's like an official Ukrainian policy. I think it's more something like local commanders who have decided that. The guy who posted that whose nickname is Botsman. He's known from his neo-Nazi ideology and so on. So that's the kind of person who considered that every person who was not against Russians were like, it's people who are thinking in a very binary mode, if I can say it like this. And it's people who are really brutal. And in the Donbass, they repressed every person who was suspected of like supporting DPR, LPR, or Russia. These people were arrested, were tortured, and even executed for that. The person I told you, this old woman who was tortured, for example, she was kidnapped by, it was right sector, so it's also a neo-Nazi battalion, because she was working for the gas company and she had a little like motorcycle, and she, when they were shelling, she was called and she had to go to the place to shut down the gas so that there is no explosion due to the shelling. And of course, she had also some numbers from the DPR side, because the gas tubes, they are going through the front line, so they are not stopping at the front line, you know. And so she had some phone numbers in her phone, and so they found that, and they have decided that this woman was certainly correcting artillery shelling for the DPR, which was absolutely not the case. I mean, she was just a civilian with DPR phone numbers in her telephone, and just because of that, she was severely tortured during several days, and it's just amazing. I mean, we have a lot of cases which were documented of this. So these all neo-Nazis regiment, they are really brutal towards civilians. Any suspicion of collaboration or support of Russia is for them absolutely unacceptable and should be punished. So I don't know if it's I've seen nothing in the level of Ukrainian government about that, but I think it was taken by some commanders, because we have seen that there were some, how can I say, discrepancies in the Bucha case, for example. We have seen that the mayor of the town did a video on the 31st of March, if I remember well. where he spoke about how he's happy that the town was liberated from the Russian occupiers and so on and so on. And there is not a single word about what this supposed massacre. Yeah, it's really strange.
Mm.
On the 2nd of April, we see a video published by the Ukrainian police. So we have this boatsman arriving, we think the 31st or the 1st. The first, he made a video about this soldier asking, can I shoot people who have not the blue armband? And the commander is answering positively. I discovered at the end of this video, we had to increase the sound to the maximum. Someone begging not to be killed, and we hear a shooting. Far from the camera, it's a little GoPro, so the sound, of course, is not very good, but you hear. The first video where you see bodies was filmed by someone, I think a soldier, on the 1st of April, but it was published really late in the evening of the 1st of April. Which is strange is at the 2nd of April, Ukrainian police, they filmed how they entered in Bucha. They are going in a lot of streets and they don't speak about the bodies in the streets. If it would have been from the government, I think the communication operation would have been a little bit more coordinated. I think the police did not publish the bodies in the street of Bucha because they understood that they were shot by their own soldiers. So they didn't want to show this massacre because the police didn't have the idea to put the blame on Russia. And so it's just after that, on the 3rd, that all the scandal began. But you see a discrepancy between what was filmed on the 1st and on the 2nd. So you understand that it was two different commanders and nothing was coordinated. So that's why I think it's more at the commander level that this kind of decision was taken.
So somebody came in, you believe, and coordinated to make...
Yeah, definitely, because the story changed. I don't know how many times, because first they said people were shot when Russian retreated, and then they claimed the people were killed much like 2 or 3 weeks before. But when I saw the bodies, I said it's not possible. I mean, the bodies which were presented were fresh. I mean, sorry for the terms, but I was recently in Mariupol where I filmed bodies who are outside for 2 weeks. You can see the difference of state of the body. I mean, it's not possible. So I said the bodies we saw in Bucha, they had maximum 2 days when the pictures were taken. And the Russians left a few days before. So it was absolutely impossible that the Russians were responsible of that. Absolutely not. And they have changed the stories, and now they are trying like, okay, people were killed by Russian shellings, so the Guardian said that, okay, this little metallic arrows, but Russians don't use this technique. I mean, they have weapons powerful enough not to use this kind of bad trick to increase. It was the same with the what happened in Kramatorsk, this shelling near the railway station, where they tried to pretend it was an Iskander, but then quickly the photos of the missile were published, and we discovered it's a Tochka-U, and Russia doesn't have Tochka-U anymore. Russia has removed Tochka-U from its weapons since 2019, and it was done publicly, and even there are some publications which are like listing all the weapons that all the armies in the world have, and even them in 2020 they wrote that it was removed because it was replaced by the Iskanders, which are much more effective than the Tochka-U. So only Ukraine is using Tochka-U, and they used even these missiles against us. I mean, the 14th of March, we had 20 people killed in Donetsk, in the center of Donetsk, by a Ukrainian Tochka-U. I mean, there is no question about that. So the problem is they try to put the blame on Russia for Ukrainian war crimes, and that's a big concern, and I cannot accept that. Sorry. I mean, of course, a war is doing victims among civilians. All the wars. I mean, you can do your best to target only military infrastructure. You will do victims. Just because sometimes military targets are near residential areas, or because the air defense of the enemy shoot your missile and it fell down on a residential area where it was not supposed to fail, and so on. So of course there are civilian victims during this war, which are due to Russian shelling of military infrastructure or military positions. But from my point of view, from what I am seeing, I saw no deliberate war crimes from Russia. Really, I've seen, on the contrary, a lot of restraint. That's why, for example, the battle for Mariupol was so long, because the Chechen soldiers told us the thing is that they are using civilians like human shield, and we received orders and we will apply them to protect at maximum the civilians, to avoid civilian casualties. So we see that from what I see no deliberate war crimes from Russia. Absolutely not.
Could I just ask you, you said the Russian forces are capturing or liberating, they're gaining a lot of territory quickly. So what's and you said that, you know, from what you've heard, a lot of people are glad that this is over, because it means an end to the for them, for the 8 years under the Ukrainian government. How do you see, how quickly is it going? Do you know from where you are what people expect or is likely to happen in the near future?
I think so. It was already discussed publicly by the DPR and LPR authorities that there should be referendums in the two republics after the end of the military operation to ask for integration into the Russian Federation. So that's something which has been openly discussed. I think after what happened in Bucha, Russia will not retreat anymore from any territory she has taken. That's for sure, because it was a big lesson for them. It was a concession they have made during negotiation with Ukraine in Istanbul to push Ukraine to make itself some concessions. And what they have seen, it was a bloody provocation and killing of innocent civilians who just accepted Russian food to survive. I mean, you cannot call that collaboration, sorry. So after what happened in Bucha, of course, all the territories that Russia has taken, she will not give it back, because they would fear that a massacre would happen in all these territories, and it's territories with millions of people. So you can imagine the bloodbath it would be if they do what they did in Bucha, in Kherson, or in places like Berdyansk or these kind of big towns. I mean, it would be really horrible. It would be a genocide. I mean, you cannot call that another way. And I think Russia will push more to the west, because now Ukraine is like threatening Transnistria, this little non-recognized republic, which is between Moldova and Ukraine, and which is under the protection of Russian peacekeepers with a UN mandate, I have to remind. And so then there are now, there were some terrorist attacks yesterday and the day before yesterday in Transnistria. And Transnistrian authorities have some video surveillance of some of the infrastructure which were targeted, which showed that these people after were left for Ukraine. So it seemed it was Ukrainian saboteurs. And we have to remind that in Transnistria there are huge amount of shells and ammunitions which were from the Soviet time. Something which is interesting, of course, Ukraine, because the missiles of the Russian Federation have destroyed a lot of places where shells, ammunitions, and military equipments were stored. A lot of storage, military storages were destroyed, and so they are now lacking ammunitions, they are lacking fuel, they are lacking shells, and even what the Europeans and Americans say now is not enough, because a lot is destroyed as soon as it arrives in Ukraine by Russia. So of course they have the idea to attack Transnistria to try to take what's in the ammunition storage. There were an attempt today from some Ukrainian forces to try to make a sabotage in this storage. And so it was repelled, hopefully, but it's a big concern. So it will, of course, push Russia. It will give Russia justification to push until Odessa, to unblock Transnistria and to ensure the security of this little republic, which is under how can I say, which security is ensured by Russia due to a UN mandate, and they have peacekeepers there, so they cannot let their peacekeepers being attacked by Ukraine like it was done in South Ossetia by Georgian army in 2008. So that's, I think it will go there. I think Kharkov will be taken also, because they have already taken territory in the Kharkov region, so they cannot retreat anymore. So they will have no other choice than to take Kharkov itself. After, I don't know, honestly. So they will, of course, help the DPR and LPR to liberate their whole territories. So the LPR is almost done. I mean, like 95% of their territories, it's now under their control. In DPR, we are like around 50%, something like that, which has been retaken already. But it's really hard. But I think, yeah, all these regions, so the Kherson region, I think the Zaporozhye region, Nikolaev will be taken, and I think Odessa and Kharkov will be taken. So all these Russian-speaking regions will be definitely taken. The others, I don't know for the moment. And I think it will depend on the attitude and the willingness of the Ukrainian authorities to finally negotiate with Russia, because they claim they want to negotiate, but they backtracked. They made some concessions, and then after they backtracked. So, as I said, from the beginning of this military operation, the more Kiev is waiting for some, I don't know what they are waiting for, some miracle. They really hope they will transform Ukraine in some kind of Afghanistan for Russia. I don't know. I think it's completely delusional, and its delusion is at the expense of the Ukrainian people, because the more this war is lasting, the more people are killed, both civilians and Ukrainian military. And I think the more it will push Russia to take more territories, to reduce the threats, because Ukraine is shelling the Russian territory. There were even some attempts with some drones in the Voronezh region this night. So the more Ukraine is doing that, terrorist attack and diversion attack and artillery attack against Russia, and the more it justifies for Russia to take control about more Ukrainian territory to protect its own population. So as I said, for me, from Kharkov to Odessa, for sure, it will be kept under control of Russia. Certainly with some People's Republic like we had in the DPR and LPR, I think, something like that. I don't know exactly, but something like that, because they don't want to see what happened in Bucha repeating itself. I mean, Bucha is a little town, so you can imagine in big towns like, as I said, like Kharkov or like Zaporozhye or Kherson. I mean, it would be really a bloodbath and a genocide. So they cannot allow that. They cannot allow that. I have to remember, from an historical point of view, that most of the Ukrainian territory, the actual territory of what we call Ukraine, 1 century ago, a little bit more than 1 century ago, it was still the Russian Empire. These people were Russians. Ukraine was created 1 century ago. Before, this country never existed. Never, ever. It's a very new country. It's really recent. So from an ethnical point of view, most of the Ukrainians in reality are Russians. If you look at the documents of the Russian Empire, these people were called the Malo-Russians, the Little Russians. So they were the White Russians, the Belarusian. The Belarusian, it's White Russians. They were the Malorossiya, the Little Russia, which is most of actual Ukraine, and the Big Russia, which is what we call now Russia. But it was one empire, one people. And in fact, most of the Ukrainian nationalism is coming from the western part of Ukraine, which was part of Austro-Hungarian and Poland. So they exchanged regularly between one empire and the other. So this notion of Ukraine was created in a part which was most of the time not part of this country. It was something which was added in the Second World War when Stalin, so he took control, the USSR took control of half of the Poland, half of Poland due to the treaty they had with Germany, and they have given this part, so this Volhynia Galicia part, they have given it to Ukraine, but it was not a part of this Malo-Russia region before. So it's an external part which brought all these ideas of Ukrainian nationalism and so on. So it's an artificial country. That's the problem. Ukraine was created from scratch without taking into account the real ethnicity of the people. There was a Ukrainization. You have to understand. When the USSR created Ukraine, they had to Ukrainize the country because most people, they spoke Russian. They didn't speak Ukrainian. Ukrainian was like countryside language used by the farmers of the western part of this Malo-Russian region. I mean, it was like, I don't know what's the equivalent, but it's like the Britain language in France and so on. I mean, it's this kind of language, you know. So they had to Ukrainize the country to create artificially Ukrainian language. I mean, the Ukrainian language was formally how to say, fixed, like the grammar, the spelling and so on. Most of it was done by the Soviets. Union. I mean, it was some kind of no. It has to be said, and it explained why the situation in the country is like this now. If you look at the votings rate of during the elections, you always see a scission between how people in the south and the east are voting, more pro-Russian, and how people in the center and in the west are voting.
Mm.
In the center, they are more pro-European. In the west, they are really more pro-Nazi. You really see the percentage of voices of some neo-Nazi parties in the west of Ukraine. It's really frightening. But there was always these scissions. That's why I said there is no one Ukraine. There are, in fact, 3 Ukraines at the minimum. So we will see how it will evolve. But I think at least all the east and south part of Ukraine will be lost for Kiev.
It's not going to be the same. It's definitely.
I think because and it's due to what they did in Bucha, because if they would not have done such a bloodbath, Russia would have been agreed to after giving back all these southern territories it has taken. It has taken them for one reason. It was to be able to defend Donbass at the first. Why? Because the main tactics is the cauldron one. So you took the opponent into a cauldron. So you encircle the enemy. But to do that in the coastal region like Mariupol, you had to really had a strong flank, not to be yourself encircled. And the only way was to go through Crimea. And to go through Crimea, you have to take the Kherson region. So I think if they would not have played such a provocation in Bucha, they would have been able to take back after much more territories, because Russia, when they left not only the region around Kiev, they left also the region around Sumy and Chernigov, if I'm not misleading. So they left a lot of territories that they have taken at the beginning of this military operation. So it was not a small retreat. I mean, they have really given back a lot of territories, which showed that they would have agreed to do that. But after this provocation, they will not, because the Russian people were really shocked by what happened in Bucha, and a lot of people reproached that to the Russian authorities by saying they were really too naive, thinking that they would not do such a bloody provocation when they retreat. So now they will not allow themselves to do the same in other regions, because on the contrary of what a lot of people think, the Russian authorities are really careful about the public opinion. A lot. I mean, people think that Vladimir Putin is a dictator. Absolutely not the case. He's looking a lot about the public opinion. That's something which matters a lot for him. To give you an example, what happened in Crimea in 2014, before he gave the orders to his soldiers to intervene to protect the populations against these neo-Nazis groups who wanted to bloodily repress the rising in Crimea. They made express polls by phone in Crimea to ask to the people, okay, if there would be some referendum, would you agree to join Russia? Yes or no? And when they saw that the result was like 90%, yes, then Putin gave the order, okay, we intervene. We intervene, because he didn't want to intervene in a region where there would not be popular support. That's mainly also why Russia didn't invade in the most western part of Ukraine, where they know that they will be seen as occupiers. as occupants, that they will not be seen as liberators. So they know that it will not be compatible. So they will not go like to Lvov or to these kind of places. Absolutely not. That's for sure. That's, I think the situation, I think Ukraine can already consider that they have lost all of the east and south part of their country. And that's their fault, because if they would have agreed to the security request from Russia at the beginning, so it's a neutral status, not entering into NATO, interdiction, no, forbidding to have NATO missiles in its territories and so on, they would not have lost so much territory. But the more they delay the war, the more territory they will lose. That's something I'm sure 100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you ever so much for
You're welcome.
It's been really, really helpful. I'm going to stop recording, but thank you, Christelle, and
you're welcome.
Anyone can look on your website, Donbass Insider.
Yeah.
Don't go while I stop recording. If you hang on for a moment.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you again.
Welcome.